Right, hello everyone. Welcome to this week's weekly challenge, or this double weeks weekly challenge. I've been meaning to get this video out for a couple of days now, but South Africa does this really cool thing where they turn off the power to the whole country. So we've had load shedding quite bad up here. So every time I've gone to make this video so far, I've had my power turned off, which is really fun. But yeah, just getting into this week's shoots, thanks to the guys who managed to get out their stuff through. I know a lot of people didn't have any time at all the last couple of weeks, so I appreciate the ones I got. I'm going to start off by showing mine, which I absolutely hate, and I'm going to show you them for a reason. I know a lot of people, especially in this subject, were not necessarily wanting to share images because they thought they were bad. And as a photographer, we all take lots of rubbish photos often. So I just want to show you that we all do it. It's a natural part of learning new photography skills and techniques. And I certainly wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't taken far too many absolutely terrible images. So let's start off with my pictures. So these are my pictures for this week. I started off, I wanted to do something cool with these Styronese, and then it turned out that I didn't. So I wanted to try sort of a lighting technique. So I shot this with a big shoot-through reflector from the top and from behind, which is giving this lovely sort of flat texture to the tabletop. And then I've used a bare flash off camera to the left and another one off camera to the right to give these sort of highlights on the little Styronese themselves. So this possibly could have gone somewhere if I'd added a few more props. I'm thinking maybe some dead leaves or some other herbs and spices, maybe a little, maybe some miniature spoons or something that sort of ties it into cooking. At the moment, this is more a beginning. It's more of a thought process rather than an actual finished image. And yeah, the crop could probably be better. Definitely could be. So there's this big sort of empty space over here on the top left. Not much going on the bottom right. I purposely wanted the middle one to be the one that was the most in focus. So I focused there, and then I wanted these ones to be slightly soft in front, so that your eye went to this middle one, and then I wanted the ones in the back to be soft. So a shot with quite a small aperture, so f5.6, but because it's with a macro lens, the depth of field is tiny. So even at 5.6 I can blur these out, and at 2.8 I could have blurred them completely. So that was my first attempt at an image. If I'd spent another couple of hours, which unfortunately I didn't have, and possibly thought about the picture a lot more before I started, it definitely would have been a lot better. Right, so the next one, again, sort of similar story. So for me, when I do a lot of food photography, there's often a lot of cutlery, and one of the hardest things to photograph is cutlery. Especially silverware. So this is stainless steel. It's also similar. So any fingerprint, any scratch, anything that is on top of cutlery almost always comes up in images unless you manage to get the lighting smack on. So this is actually a very scratched up big old cheese grater. And I wanted to take the challenge to light it nicely where it looked like it was new. So if I'd placed this into a food shoot, it would have been good. So again, this is more of a lighting technique for me. It's a big, soft light from behind. So it's essentially almost like looking at a lake with the sun setting in the background. All of this white is actually the light bouncing straight or reflecting from the big soft light source up here, hitting the shiny surface and then bouncing into the camera. And you can see the direction of the light by looking at the shadows here. So literally straight in behind, and then a nice big light source. If the light source wasn't big enough, you'd get very harsh specular highlights. So the light source needed to be very big. The bigger your light source is compared to your subject, the softer the light. So then you're getting this nice soft light on here and these nice soft shadows. And that's sort of where my brain in the shoot stopped again. So again, this is more of a beginning of an image. Again, there probably should be something to do with cheese or maybe some vegetables here to be grated. But yeah, my inspiration on the day of shooting wasn't too high, and I was quite rushed as we had to go out and do something. So yeah, I'm happy with the lighting on the grater itself, but again, image-wise, it's a bit meh, it's a bit boring, and could have easily been much better if I had have done anything at all else staging-wise. Right, the last two I couldn't decide between the two, but they're essentially almost the same. So these are the last two images here. And it's this nice old dying rose. So Kirsten's birthday a couple of weeks back, she got some roses. And now they have started to fall apart and wilt and things like that. So what's quite nice about still life is these sort of old dead dying things, or just old things in general, look quite cool in this genre. So the first one is obviously composition wise, I like this much better. So you know me by now, I like things on a third, slightly to the left. I've purposely underexposed this image by 2/3 of a stop, and that's because the leaves are obviously quite dark and it's a bright pink flower, so I didn't want to lose any detail there in the highlights of the flower, because that's the most important part, but I also wanted to make most of this quite dark so that it sort of goes away without losing too much detail on the leaves that are visible. So I'm not worried about these super dark areas in here, because this is essentially a hole. There is no detail there, you can't see anything because there's nothing there. So as long as the leaves have detail, I'm quite happy. And then I went with this sort of funky coloring. I first tried the sepia preset that I made, and it didn't actually look that great. It was a little bit flat and not really exciting at all. So I went with this sort of weird purpley orange look, and it worked a lot better. Again, probably could have done something a little bit more exciting than this, but yeah, like I say, this is a super hard challenge, especially if you're not used to shooting this type of subject. And the last image is basically the same subject from a different direction, and I couldn't decide between liking this one or this one. I like this sort of orange stripe that goes through here. This corner is way too bright, and it actually takes away from the subject. The subject's smack bang in the middle. But the coloring in this image I like slightly more than this, even though they've had the same processing. So that was my images. That was my 3, even though I couldn't get it down to 3. Yeah, a little bit meh. But again, this is a challenging challenge, because a lot of us aren't used to photographing this type of thing. So good to get the brain going. Nice to get a little bit frustrated with photography every now and then to try and learn something new, and I definitely got frustrated with this, so I'll keep that in mind when I go through you guys' images as well. Right, so first off, let's start with Jane. She got one image through before she ran out of time, so that's this image here. Now from still life basically can encompass anything that's really not moving or living, or it sort of encompasses anything, arbitrary objects that you've got lying around. So food photography is technically part of the still life genre, which is what I would kind of lump this into, the food photography area. And for food photography, one biggest tips I can give you if you're ever interested in food photography is shooting with the light coming from behind. So this looks like it was, I can't see what it's on, but obviously on a table or a black cloth or something like that. And then you can see by looking at these specular highlights here, it looks like a flash was placed on the camera and then it was shot that way. So whenever you shoot with a flash directly, sorry, my computer's having a moment here. Whenever you shoot with a flash directly on your camera at a subject, you're going to get these quite harsh specular highlights. It's a small flash size compared to your subject. So like I said before, the larger your flash, the softer the light that comes off it in comparison to your subject. So this is quite a harsh light, and you can see that the shadow edges are very, very harsh. So if you look in here, so for food photography, for certain types of food, harsh light is actually important because harsh light shows texture. Now, where it sort of doesn't work quite so well with this type of thing is because it's not coming from behind, or at least from the side, the image is quite flat. So these lovely little textures and things that you actually get within these fruits is not being emphasized because the light is coming from straight behind the camera, on top of the camera. Other than that, I think the composition's maybe just a teeny tiny little bit too tight. I would have liked a little bit wiggle room. And then I like how the main part of this subject is not symmetrical. So you've obviously got the fruit here, a little bit of peel to make it a little bit exciting and interesting. And then obviously these nice little 3 pieces here. I think because this is very staged, and obviously food photography is all staged, perhaps these 3 pieces could have been placed slightly differently to make them more sort of stick out a little bit more. So this piece almost could be one piece. So if this was just facing a different way, it would have been something to play with. Certainly if I'd shot this, I would have shot this a number of different ways. Once I had nailed my lighting, I would have played with all of these. So I would have gone away with probably 10, 15 different styled images, with everything else being in the same place, but with these things being different. And then with the back, I would say it's just slightly too symmetrical. So obviously you've got 3 in here, 3 in here, but because they're just off to each side, I would have perhaps maybe had one a little bit further away, or something similar to that. So it's just not so quite so symmetrical. But yeah, if this is a new first time venture into food and that type of thing, it's not a bad attempt. And then the main thing, again, I just reiterate, so if this is the most important thing for food is to get that light off to the side. So a nice thing for food photography is if you've got a nice big window, and especially if it has sort of a one of those, you're going to see I'm a boy now, I don't know what they're called, that little sheet that's kind of behind the curtain, or the curtain that's behind the curtain, that's that sort of white see-through material. That stuff works brilliantly as a softbox. So if you've got a nice big curtain, I would have put that sort of maybe 3/4 over here, sort of angle, and that way the light would have been shooting across this way, and then it would have really put the emphasis on these little segments and given it great texture in here, with also making it not so flat. So yeah, that would be my critique for that one. Great attempt. And yeah, I'm probably make a food category at some stage. So hopefully all these little tips help. Right, let's move on to Kari's. Let's start with this first image here. So I think out of Kari's 3 images, we can actually look at them all together here. So quite a nice selection here. And the reason I started with this one on the right is I think out of all of them, it's possibly the weakest, but not necessarily a bad image. So I love the use of the color tones here. I have no idea what color these bottles are originally, but by going with this nice sepia, with this sort of rusted looking wall, it gives you a nice feel to the image. So the rusty wall goes with this metal cap. And not so much this little metal cap, but still metal on with rusty metal on rusty metal background. It all works quite nicely. Exposure is really nice, so we haven't lost any highlights. Now again, with product photography, it's very similar to food photography, where the most important thing is to get our lights away from center. And you can see here that Kari has managed to do that. So if we look at where the highlights are, they're not in the middle, so it's hard to guess what type of lighting this is on these shiny subjects, but I would guess possibly a window, and you can see Y. So it's sort of a big square, whatever it is. And because it's off to the side, it gives you these nice highlights on the side of the products, which is quite nice. So what my favorite highlight on this whole thing is this one here on the lid, giving this nice sharp edge. Looks like maybe a leather couch or something similar that it's shot on, which is quite nice. It kind of goes with the rusted metal leather type of look. And then obviously you've got 3 different bottles of different products. So this works well. I like, well, in art, odd numbers definitely go better than even numbers. So I like the 3. And then this last one being toppled over, because I'm assuming this one and this one are probably similar heights. It actually adds a new dimension, the fact that we go from large, medium, and then this nice fallen over one, which is also kind of pointing out of the frame, so your eye goes from left to right as well. So it's yeah, nice interesting image, and well thought out and well played with. Right, so the second one, obviously fishing is important in your life. I can see we've got the same sort of leather couch or something similar that we've shot on. We've obviously brought in this nice cool stick into the studio, or call it a studio, and then the black background. So for me, it's a tiny little bit too dark. So to have black and then this solid black in the background, I would have liked a tiny little piece of light if possible, just to either go over here to let you really see the texture, or have no light whatsoever so that it's solid black, so that you don't almost see there's something there and want to go through. And then lastly, the light on the right is very nice, but the shadow sides, and especially down here in the image, are quite dark. So I would have just taken either a white box or just an A4 piece of paper or something and placed it around about here. You can just hold it next to the shot, and that would have bounced a tiny little bit of light back into the shadow side, which is would have just added a nice little pop of light on the other side there. Other than that, yeah, it's quite nice. So again, so this is one of those weird ones where it's technically even numbers, but it works because your brain doesn't really see it as 4 things. It sees it as 3 of these and 1 of those. So it works quite well. I also quite like this little triangle that these have made, as it makes your eye go around like this. And then obviously this is circular, so your eye's going to go around here, and this last little strand of cotton or a wire brings you back into this interesting area again. What it might have just made this ever so slightly better, especially from a compositional rule, would have been to just chop off a bit of the top and bottom. So coming in a little bit tighter makes it a lot more about these guys, gets rid of a lot of that black down here and a lot more there. So that would have been my one tip there, maybe just chop off a touch of the top and the bottom. And by changing the perspective from this 3x2 to 10x8, makes it a little bit more square and does that quite nicely for you. Right, so the next image is actually a really, really nice one. So you can see here, again, the light is off to the right, the main light. There's possibly 2 lights in here, and the reason I say that is the front side of this fish is lit really nicely, and you can see, this is what I was talking about earlier, by getting that light off to the side, look at this amazing detail it's given to the texture on these scales here. So really good use of light there, and also this lovely specular highlight off to the side giving detail in these lemons, so it's really nice. Now the reason I say there's probably more than 1 light is because this is on the front of the fish, but you can see behind the fish here there's a tiny touch of light here, but also the lemon is lit, and then on the top of the rod here there's this nice streak of light as well. So really nice lighting. I would have, if possible, and the problem is I don't know what equipment everyone has, but if you had 1 more light, even if it was a lamp or something like that, I would have just placed it camera left and behind, just to fill in this tiny little bit of black over here. I don't mind it over here because there's so much interest here, but I would have just loved to have seen the textures and things of these leaves in the corner. and then this shadow is just a touch too dark. Other than that, I think I would have used a slightly bigger aperture or smaller aperture as well. So you're already at f8, but you can see the rod's already starting to go a little bit soft, and I think it's an important part of the image, so I would have liked the rod a little bit sharper. But obviously the fish and the eye of the fish are the sharpest parts, which is a good use of focus there, which is good. And then beautiful lighting on the main parts of the subject. So the reel is beautiful, the fish and the scale detail is really nice, and these lemons are really good. So yeah, a really nice selection of images there. Much better than mine, I can tell you that, so well done. Right, so next we have Linda. Let's start from this side as well. Let's go and show you all of the images here. So 3 images, 3 completely different images, which is nice as well. I think we'll start off with this one. So for me, this one is also again the weaker of the 3. Not to say it's a bad image. If this was a image that was for anything to do with marketing or a newspaper article about a library, this would have absolutely nailed it. Good use of depth of field. So what is your aperture here? So 6.3. So all 3 of these books are pretty much the same amount of focus with because of your depth of field, which is really nice. But you've blurred all these background ones, which is great, because they're not gonna take away from the main subject by being too sharp. So really nice use of depth of field there. I would have given it possibly either a teeny little bump in saturation, or I would have taken a little bit of saturation down, but that's just me, and I'm not quite sure what the thought process behind the story was. So if I almost see this as a newspaper article about a story about a library or something similar to that. So that's why I'm thinking maybe a little bit of saturation out, because it kind of matches that newspaper theme. But that's just my brain now going. But other than that, yeah, nice straight lines, which is perfect. Exposure is good. Great use of depth of field. So nice image starting off. Right, so for me, for still life, this basically, if you sent me this image and said, what is this? I would have said still life. So it's a great use of monotone and sepia, which takes me straight to still life. I really like the old sort of rusty look of the scissors and obviously the pins and things. It's really nicely laid out. So you've got the 3 bits of cotton over here on the right, which is balanced really nicely with this pair of scissors, which is taking you in and out of the scene. And then really smart use of wrapping this tape measure not only over here, but around here and back in a circle. So your eye really does go through the shot quite nicely. So yeah, this image is great. It does exactly what it needs to. The one thing you could play with, if you can be bothered going back and doing it, would be using the technique which I talked about before. So large, soft light from behind, and then seeing if you can get this little section here of the scissors, not the dark part, but this top part, to really sort of go brighter white and really pop off the page. So, but yeah, other than that, that's not a criticism. It's just if you want to play with something new. But yeah, great image here. Right, so we've gone away from food photography and definitely into more product into your shoot, which is quite cool. And a nice use of white background. Most shoe shops would be happy to have an image similar to this as their advertising shot. So we won't go into the actual shoes themselves because I hate shoes. My mother had way too many pairs, so it was something I grew up despising as a child. But so I won't talk about the style of shoe, etc. But I really like the way, again, that you've laid it out, and the use of black shoes and this amazing bright pop of lipstick. So for me, this image just screams woman or a woman's magazine. or fashion, high fashion, something similar to that. It's really nicely done. So again, nice use of light. So you can see it's a relatively big light because the highlights are quite soft, which is good. I think if you'd used a smaller light and the shadows would have been really harsh, and also these highlights would have been really hard-edged and harsh as well. So nice use of lighting here. And then, yeah, I love this little pop of color as well, which is really cool just to balance it out. The one thing, and this is more a computer error, is because these are black shoes, but there's this sort of funky green tint coming into them. In Lightroom, I would have just gone and, let's hurry this up. Yeah, there we go. So just taken a circular marquee, drawn it out when my computer finally wakes up. There we go. And then just dropped it over the color part of the image, and then make sure we're working on the right part. Yep. So we want to, just from the shoes, I would have taken the saturation 100% down. So there you can see that little weird tint of green that was coming through just from the computer screen itself and the photography process. You see there it is in the shoes. Just by making this little circular tool here and then taking all the saturation down, that little bit of weird green is gone, and now we've got a proper black shoes, nice black and white lighting, and then this really nice pink lipstick here, or sorry, not lipstick, it's nail polish. But yeah, so now I think it's just even cleaner and even nicer look there. So that's my only thing for this image. Really nice selection. Yeah, well done. Right, so moving on to Sarah's pictures. Let's have a look at them. What is my computer doing today? So here they are, all three of them together. And obviously nice, very different looking pictures here. And let's get into them. Right, so Sarah, I think you're even going to know what I'm going to say, and this one's for Giannis as well. Just the first thing straight off the bat is just these corners. So just the chopping off of the top here, and just this little one's foot is the biggest thing that jumps out from me straight away. But other than that, the image is quite interesting. So you've got, it's kind of like a mishmash of just texture, and it's because of the lighting. So there's really nice lighting which is coming from behind this wall, lighting up the floor here. So your first instinct is you want to kind of look around these areas, and you're getting this nice texture between the brickwork and things like that. And then you come back, sort of loop back in on these dark parts, and you're seeing all these nice textural areas on top of the chairs and things like that as well. And then you hit these lovely textural flowers, and then again this background with all these broken bricks. So it's an image which is possibly verging on too busy, but it's definitely one that you can't complain there's nothing to look at. There's something happening absolutely everywhere. What's tricky with these types of subjects is because they're weird shapes, you can see that the table kind of looks like it's leaning a little bit out of shot to the right. It could be because of uneven bricks and things like that, or just the camera's angle. If you'd shot it from a tiny little bit lower, you would have lost the detail here, which wouldn't have been so great. So that's good camera angle. And if you'd shot it from too much higher, I think you would have lost all this amazing texture on the floor. So the shooting angle is very nice, and it makes the chairs sort of larger than life, which is quite cool, because it sort of heroes the chairs, and chairs are not really heroes very often in a story. So yeah, first shot, nice one. Just watching these little clippings and chopping offs in the corners there. Right, so the next one. Now I must remember what you told me this was. I believe this is a tea box. I hope I got that right. So a very cool looking old ornament, well not ornament, collector's item here. You see the really cool sort of little almost claws nice details in the woodwork. So it's a really nice subject. Paired with a Gucci Guilty, I have no idea what that is, but it adds really nice texture to the shot. So you sort of have this smooth wood, although it's quite textural, and then you have this really chunky metal over the top. Now this one we didn't resend, so you can see here it's I was going to say it looked a little bit out of focus, but I think it was the image size there. Aperture 5.6, which is nice, so we're obviously getting all of these in focus here. Now with your highlights, it's similar to what I was saying before. If you watch the other critiques, if you've got a big window, the bigger the window, the softer the light, and then the smoother these highlights will be, so the less harsh they'll be. And then also, if you have one of those back curtains, whatever it's called, the sort of see-through white curtains over that window, it'll make this a really nice soft light. And the closer you get it to the window, the nicer and softer the light gets, and the less harsh these little white highlights in the glass will get. So that's a nice little tip for product photography, for food photography, for portraits, in anything really. So the bigger the light is compared to your subject, and the closer it is to the subject, the softer the light is, the softer the shadows get, and the less harsh all the specular highlights get. So it's a nice one to remember for shooting in future. Great job on getting the horizons straight. So you see all of our vertical lines, horizontal lines, all the ones left to right, lovely and straight. Now with the lines on the edges, so these ones here, if you had got a tiny little bit lower, that is a terrible line, a tiny little bit, undo, low. So if we had got a teeny little touch lower to the subject, so for here I can tell just by looking at these lines, so where they're lying here, you shot this a little bit higher than the subject's middle. So if you get lower, a touch lower, and then keeping these lines on the top straight, you'll actually see that these lines on the side will also, sorry, I'm not drawing very well. Let's try this side. These lines on the side will start to get straighter up and down as well, without having a big S in it. So that is all shooting perspective. So obviously, let's have a look at your lens here. I'm going to guess that it's super wide. Yeah, so 14 mils. So the wider your lens is, the more these lines will bend when you're a little bit up or down in your shooting position. So if you had stood back, I don't know how big this room is, if you've managed to get back, say 5-6 meters, and zoomed in and had sort of similar to a 200 millimeter focal length or similar, if possible, you'd see that these lines, which don't go straight up and down, would have actually been less angular. So that's not a shooting fault. It's an optical lens phenomenon. And the way to get around that is either zooming in, like I say, or just getting a tiny little bit lower, and you'll see those will pop out. But other than that, it's a really nice image. So the exposure is almost perfect, and it's a tricky exposure to get because these bottles are so bright versus the dark side of this wood that you couldn't have done anything much else, because if you'd gone brighter for the wood, you would have lost more detail here. And if you'd gone darker to keep more detail here, you would have had a black piece of wood. So lighting wise, nothing you could have done in camera. One little tip for this little area, just to add a tiny touch of shadow, is again, you could have held, if you'd had handy and around you, just taken a white piece of paper and held it just outside the camera shot, and then what that does is it will actually bounce light off the paper and then into, hey, look at that, it was a straighter line, and then into the shadow side of this subject. So A white piece of paper is a brilliantly handy thing to have lying around, especially for food products, even portraits, all sorts of things. So, and then obviously the bigger your subject gets, the bigger your white piece of paper needs to be. Otherwise, you can use a white sheet, a white wall, anything like that. So that's a nice little tip for you for there. Right, so let's have a look at the last image in here. And this is one of my absolute favorites. So this shot is brilliant, not only for the way it looks, but just the thinking outside the box and bringing still life back to wildlife photography. So obviously most people are here because of wildlife photography, and when someone says still life, the last thing on your mind is wildlife. So yeah, a brilliant use here of a painting. So obviously a painting of this beautiful bee eater on the back, and then bits and pieces from around the house. So we've obviously got these pieces of aloe here in the foreground, and then these nice porcupine quills. Now what I really like about this picture is it looks the way it would if you had taken an actual image of a bird in the bush with bushes in the front. So by using an aperture of 5.6 and focusing on the bird, you can see that these aloe leaves and the porcupine quills here have gone nice and soft, which is what you would have tried to have done in the wild as well. And then obviously it takes away these distractions because they're not sharp anymore, and puts your emphasis straight onto the bird itself. So really, really smart use of a piece of artwork and then some stuff lying around in your house, which is really cool. Exposure is really good. So obviously the bird is the subject, so the exposure on that is perfect. Your porcupine quills, even though the whites are quite white, they are white and black. So and like I say, they're secondary in the picture to the bird, so it's actually not important if the whites were too bright. So, and actually I would argue that they're not. And other than that, it's a really cool picture. So framing wise, you could possibly, I don't know what the rest of the image looks like, and I really like the 16:9 long skinny crop. You could possibly argue for if slightly if the image in the back allows it, a slightly different crop where the bird was on a different third, so more like this, and then moved these sticks and porcupine quills sort of more to over here. And I only say that because the bird's looking this way, so he's looking into the shot. But again, so I'm assuming it's possible with the painting. It may very well may not be. Other than that, if that's not possible, just going ever so slightly higher to not be so close to his head. So even if we'd sort of started from about there and finished sort of roughly around about here, just so he's got a little bit more space to breathe. And then obviously these things can be picked up and moved, so that would have worked if it was allowed by the painting in the background, which I'm not sure. But other than that, a super, super cool image, really nicely thought out and thinking outside the box, bringing it back to wildlife, which is really cool. Righty-ho, so that is it for this double week challenge. Thanks again so much for getting your images in, and I hope it was a challenge. I hope it hurt. Because it definitely was a challenge for me, and it hurt me big time. So the nicest way to learn in photography is to to hate it and struggle the way through it every now and then, because it really makes you learn and think about things differently. So quite a cool challenge. Next one won't be so horrible. We'll bring it back to something a little bit nicer, and it'll be in the description down below. Cool, thanks very much. We'll see you next time.